The June 10, 2019 work session of the Williamsburg City Council will come to order. Ms. Burcham, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Maslin?
Here.
Ms. Ramsey?
Here.
Mayor Freiling?
Here.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Here.
Mr. Zhang?
Here.
Items for City Council meeting of June 13, 2019, council preview. Mr. Trivette, anything you'd like to highlight?
We have a pretty full meeting for Thursday. We've got a public hearing on the Econo Lodge on Parkway Drive to convert that to affordable housing. And then we have a list of other items, probably the highlight of which is a consideration of an MOU for the moving of Launchpad into the William and Mary Entrepreneurship Hub downtown.
Great. Questions for Mr. Trivette?
Sure.
This takes us to the public comment portion of the meeting, where we're happy to take public comment on any of the issues that council will be addressing at our Thursday meeting. And if anybody would like to comment on any other matter and prefers not to wait until the open forum at the end of this meeting, we're happy to hear that too. I have one speaker's card. Mr. Glazner, would you like to go ahead now? And if you could, for the record, please, sir, just state your name and address.
Excuse me, I'm Charlie Glazner. I come today as a landlord in the city. There's a provision in the city's ordinances whereby if a tenant doesn't pay their water bill, that the landlord can be held responsible. That is one of several solutions that I guess the water department has in order to collect bills. And I feel that is completely wrong, and that remedy needs to be no longer enforced. There's a transaction, I mean a two-party agreement between the tenant and the city to provide water. If they don't pay their bill, it's up to the city to deal with it, not me. I didn't drink any of their water. I didn't use any of their water for any reason whatsoever. Power company doesn't do that. The city of Newport News doesn't do that. I don't know whether James City County does it or not, but it is absolutely unfair to hold me accountable for somebody's water bill. Some of the reasons that I have heard when bringing a subject up pretty much goes to the bottom line of, well, it's the law. Well, I know it's the law, and we're just following the law, and that's sort of like, we're just following orders. Pretty weak stance. I'm sure the city attorney can provide you all with the ordinance. I'd like to come back at the next council meeting, and you all can perhaps take time to try and justify this. I think we all need to realize that municipalities and state governments and federal governments make laws that are not good. And this is one of them. And not only should it be stricken from our records, but our local representatives should be made aware of it, take it back to Richmond and say, bad law. Undo this. This is unfair. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glazner. Mr. Trivette, I think over the next couple of weeks, perhaps, if it works for you to have conversations individually with some council members and get everybody's give them the background and then see what they think on this.
Glad to do it.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to address council? Seeing no one, we'll move on to our background presentations and discussion. The first of which is a presentation on the progress and connectivity of the I-64 widening plan from Richmond to Norfolk, including the format of the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. Mr. Trivette?
Yes, thank you. I asked Mr. Crum from the HRPDC to come and join us today to give you a presentation on the I-64 project, and I call it that because we so frequently get stuck on the three segments that are most proximate to us, and really this is a much bigger project that now spans all the way from the city of Richmond through the HRBT, and I thought it would be a good opportunity for Mr. Crum to kind of give us the highlights of the entire project, and so that we can start thinking about impacts on the city of Williamsburg as a result.
Mr. Crum? Could come over to this podium, please. First of all, welcome. Now, if you could please come to this podium.
Mr. Mayor, City Council members, thank you for the opportunity. Again, I'm Bob Crum, Executive Director of the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization and also the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. Pleased to be joined this afternoon by Mike Kimbrell. Mike is our Deputy Executive Director and in charge of our Transportation Planning Department. So between Mike and myself, we hope to be able to give you the information you need and give you some updates on really an exciting time for Hampton Roads, for the peninsula, some of the projects that we have occurring, and then really talk with you about how we're going to try to mobilize as a region to improve our connectivity from Hampton Roads, from the peninsula, getting our way to 295, and how a strategy for trying to advocate for those improvements. If I may, and I spoke with Mr. Trivette about this, I thought I'd start sort of bigger picture and talk with you about all the construction that's happening in Hampton Roads as we speak. Really, this goes back to a decision that was made by the General Assembly in 2013. This region for many decades has always had a list of transportation priorities, all of them on the interstate highway network, but we never had the funding to really move the construction. And that all changed in 2013, where the General Assembly approved House Bill 2313, which in Hampton Roads and Northern Virginia, the only two regions at that time in Virginia, created regional taxes to help with transportation project construction. So in Hampton Roads, we pay a little more in gas tax, a little more in sales and use tax. Today, that generates about $180 million per year that's put into the Hampton Roads Transportation Fund that's managed by one of our partner organizations. You might know them as HR TAC. And that money is required to be dedicated to projects in Hampton Roads that offer the most congestion relief for our residents within our Planning District Commission. We're really excited about what's been done with those monies and those projects, and they're illustrated on this map that we have. And I'd like to review those for you very quickly. I'm going to jump to, we'll leave the peninsula for the last segment to discuss, but let's sort of begin on jumping to the south side a second. The 264-64 interchange project that is the main access point to Virginia Beach, phase one of that intersection project down here on the south side, phase one will be completed in October. That's going to really help us with throughput through that interchange. It's the first of three phases of improvements to the 264-64 interchange project. The second big project on the south side being funded with your regional tax dollars is the high-rise bridge in 64 South Side. Major congestion point. Those improvements will go the whole way from Bowers Hill. They're going to move through the high-rise bridge and go the whole way to Greenbrier. And if you've been through that area recently, you see a lot of construction on 64 South Side in that area. Really excited about that project. What we're going to do is the current bridge is going to stay in place. What you see going in is a parallel bridge, downriver if you will, from the current bridge. It's going to be a higher bridge structure. We're going to have 6 lanes through that project. Really excited about that project. It's really going to address the mobility issue on the south side. The landmark project is the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel project. The Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel project, $3.8 billion, represents the largest construction project in the history of Virginia. We're really pleased that the region's come together, prioritize that project for construction, completion due in 2025. What's going to happen on the military base side, if you will, of the current bridge tunnel, they're going to use a directional boring machine. Instead of submersion tubes and connecting the tubes and sinking them, they'll actually bore underwater. That will help us keep the channel open for our military, keep the channel open for our port. The final cross section there will be 3 lanes on each side as you approach the tunnel, 4 lanes underwater. So we really think that's going to help with mobility, and Mike, if you have any questions, can talk more about that project. And then let's go up to the peninsula. Obviously, Great news, they were the first projects that we moved the regional tax money to. Segment 1 complete, Segment 2 complete. I still have some board members and supervisors and council members that tell me when they approach Jefferson, they still are conditioned to putting on the brake. But we're really pleased. What a drive now, quick drive from the south side to Busch Gardens. And of course, Segment 3 to follow, also currently under construction. Segment 3 will be complete in 2021. That's going to give us a widened section, of course, to west of Williamsburg, and something that we're very, very excited about. So let's talk about the bigger picture then. First off, Mr. Trivette, I have handouts of this, if I may, distribute to council. I do have some quick handouts of these slides, just so
You're welcome to, but they're also viewing them on there.
Do they have them? Very good. So I'll leave for audience members. Mike, maybe if you could help me distribute those around for audience members. What I'd like to hand out to everybody is the map that you saw on the screen, so everybody has that to take with them. That shows you not only the location of the projects, but anywhere in red, that's your regional tax money at work. That's your money being invested in these projects. And then on the back, this slide, this shows you the target dates for completion of each and every one of those projects. Before I go any further, I'd just like to present a couple of quick numbers for you. What I've outlined represents $5 billion of transportation investment. 92% of those dollars are your local regional tax dollars. Zero federal dollars thus far. We're working. We're hopeful for federal dollars. We have a little bit of state smart scale money. But that really sets the stage for where we want to go next. And where we need to go next, we believe, is the completion of what we've called the gap between Hampton Roads and Richmond. Now, my friend, I worked in Richmond before I came to Hampton Roads 4 years ago now. My friends from Richmond have begun widening 64, as you're aware, from 295, and they're coming this way to Bottoms Bridge. That's about the first 6 miles. But what that leaves us is about a 29-mile gap in between, where we're leaving off and where Richmond is going to Bottoms Bridge. Mike and his team have taken a close look at that gap. We believe the number to construct that gap is somewhere in the $450 million to $600 million range. And Mike can talk more about that. But there aren't as many bridges, there aren't as many complexities in that 29-mile gap. Now, challenges. The challenges we have for finishing the gap is there's just not a lot of funding available at the state level. Challenge 1. Challenge 2 is our neighbors to the west of Richmond region, they do not have these regional taxes available that we have, okay? And of course, we can't spend our tax money outside of Hampton Roads. But an opportunity is present, and before I go on to the opportunity, I'll say this. Last year in the statewide funding competition for Smart Scale, statewide, there was $400 million available statewide. We took $200 million of that for HRBT, half of it, because of the congestion relief. I just give you those data points to say there's not a lot of money available statewide to get at this gap project. But something happened in the last General Assembly session presents an opportunity for us, and that was the I-81 funding agreement, right? You're aware that there's a similar funding package created for Interstate 81 with some taxes and fees. As part of the negotiation of that deal, some money was allocated to Northern Virginia, some to I-95 in the Fredericksburg area north of Richmond, but also monies were allocated to Interstate 64. It's going to take a couple years for this funding to ramp up, but best we can tell, in the neighborhood of $27 to $27.3 million a year will be available for the I-64 corridor, okay? Now, it's not very detailed where that is. The I-64 corridor, we interpret that as being, you know, from our region the whole way to Interstate 81. What we are putting together as a region, what we're going to bring to our regional board on July 18th, and what some of your neighboring localities have already started to sign on to, and we really believe we can get regional support for this, is we want to ask the state, when they start allocating that money from the I-81 funding agreement, to make completion of the gap a priority, to start applying that $27 million a year to our gap, and furthermore, to start here in the Hampton Roads region. Mike, about how many miles do we have left in Hampton Roads for us?
It's 9 miles.
So we have about 9 miles left in Hampton Roads from where our Phase 3 project ends to where to get to the New Kent County line. We want to ask them to start building 64 from our end, working to the New Kent County line and applying that $27 million a year. We think then if we can keep picking away at that, if we can encourage them to put in some smart scale applications, if we can get a infrastructure funding package from the federal level, that all those things working together then will get us moving, and we can continue to push forward and move completion of that project to Richmond. But the first ask that we want to get behind as a region is let's take care of that remaining 9 miles in our region, finish it to that New Kent County line. So with that brief overview, Mike, anything that you want to add to anything that I've said?
Just a couple of pieces of good information, I think, for making our case. There's 75 miles of I-64 within our boundary from the New Kent County line all the way down to Bowers Hill. With the projects that Bob talked about earlier, when you take those into account, that and the parts of I-64 that are already at least 6 lanes wide, that will mean that with those projects in place, we'll have 66 of the 75 miles of I-64 in Hampton Roads at least 6 lanes wide. So we think that's a strong point. The other thing is all those projects Bob talked about, that adds up to about $5 billion worth of projects on the interstate system, right on I-64. About 92% of that is being paid for with our regional dollars. So 92% of $5 billion of interstate projects are being paid for with our local dollars that we're all just paying in through our extra gas tax and our sales tax. So we think that that makes a little bit of a point to how about let's spend some state dollars on this piece of I-64 just beyond segment 3. So those are some of the points that we'd like to make in the resolution that the HRTPO board is going to approve in July, and we'd be happy to share some of those talking points with the city if they're interested in producing your own resolution of support for that project. We think, in addition, since they're marching right up I-64, you know, the equipment's already mobilized. There's a good chance that you could get some economies of scale because they already know how to do this project. They've got the equipment there. They've got the people there. We think that you can get the job going a lot more cost effectively than if you were to move it to some other part of the state and start working in some other parts. So we're going to try to make some good suggestions along those lines and strongly encourage them to make the piece in Hampton Roads the first piece that gets paid for with some of that I-81 funding that's going to be available for I-64.
Mr. Mayor, we'll pause there, see what questions you or council members may have.
Come back to council for questions, comments?
You didn't really talk about it, but I'm interested to know how that gap fell out of the Hampton Roads Transportation District and the Richmond, and so it's kind of a no man's zone. What's the story behind that, and is that something that ought to be a priority for us to try to incorporate into Hampton Roads or vice versa?
So it's a great question. So obviously our regional TPO, it includes up to our line in the county. Right? It includes all of the Hampton Roads region. For Richmond, a lot of their congestion is in that 95-64 corridor in areas west, right? So when they're looking at investment for congestion relief, it tends to be in those locations. So the difficult thing for us is it falls outside of our geographic area where we can actually invest those dollars. Having said that, though, I think that our working relationship that we have with the Richmond region and the TPO and VDOT, we're hopeful that we can move things forward. It's going to be difficult, though, to compete for congestion relief, to be honest. Our modeling shows that when you get the 3 phases of 64 complete, and you know this roadway better than we do in this particular area, that you start to lose a lot of the congestion. Having said that, we think we can make a strong case for military accessibility. We think we can make a strong case for the importance to our national security. We think we can make a very strong case for import and export from our port and how that drives the economy, not only in our Commonwealth, but in the East Coast of the United States. We're very confident we can make a strong case to try to get this gap addressed.
Well, yeah, I agree with just about everything you said. I mean, in fact, everything. You know, it's all the reasons in the world why we need to get this done, and those are just some of them: national defense and commerce. But we talk about congestions. One of my concerns, and I think lots of people share it, is what's going to happen here locally when it starts to bottleneck at 234, 199 there. All those folks are going to start coming into town and create a significant problem and cause pressure locally. It may not be interstate traffic pressure, but it's going to be problematic. And so I know council, and I won't speak for them, but we're all on board with making this a priority and following kind of that thought process. While these folks are out there doing the construction, it'd be nice if they just continued, without breaking stride. And trying to, if they go away and then having them reassemble and reman, that's a different game at that point. So I certainly support all your efforts and look forward to continuing doing just that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, yes, sir. And I think that, from our perspective, we really believe we can get 17 localities behind this and this importance. And let's be honest, this segment of I-64, critical for our entire region. We're hopeful with that type of uniform support on July 18th. We are going to meet with our Hampton Roads delegation on August the 28th, and this will be one of the items we'll be sharing with them as an important regional priority. We've shown when we've stood united, we've had a lot of influence, and we believe we can on this particular item.
Thank you, Bob and Mike, for coming here today and
Yes, sir.
providing this very informative presentation. I think there is a keen interest for all of our neighboring localities, as you had mentioned, in getting this priority through. My question is simply, have you telegraphed this idea to the governor's administration? Kind of what are some of the feedback you've heard from the administration or from maybe individual members of our delegation? Thanks
for that question. It's a great one. What we have heard is strong support. And in fact, we stood, Mike, it seems like it was just yesterday when we stood at the groundbreaking for Segment 1, and then Governor McAuliffe said, #1 priority in the Commonwealth of Virginia is I-64 to finish it to Richmond. And Mike, I turned to Mike and said, clip that paper, we're including that in every application, and we have. But that's to their credit, that is very consistent with what we've heard. I think the Commonwealth is behind this. I think the challenge has been the shortage of dollars. Hopefully this 81 funding agreement, it's a shame to say that $27 million a year is not a lot of money, but if you can leverage that with some other dollars, hopefully we can continue keep at this and drive it forward. But to answer your question, we've not heard anybody disagreeing with us at the state level. So right. And just a quick follow-up to that, and forgive me, I don't understand maybe some of the nuances towards how the organization works with state funding. Virginia Municipal League received a briefing from its consultant, Jim Rinjabal, that there might be some favorable revenue outlooks for the upcoming budgetary considerations. Is there any possibility that some of those additional revenues might flow into HR TAC or HRTPO? I do realize that the majority of it is locally funded, but. So the answer to that is it won't flow to our HR TAC. That's only our regional dollars. At the TPO, and your staff is great working with us, we do have some access to some other monies, RSTP monies, CMAQ monies, and I know your staff monitors this very well. As we move forward and you start thinking about impacts on your city, some of those might be candidate projects you want to be sending our way the consideration. But the opportunity, if the revenue outlook improves at the state level, we've been on record starting last year, and I believe we'll make another statement this year, that we need more state money in smart scale. If we can get more state money in smart scale, let's be honest, to have $400 million available in the statewide competition is not enough money, right? And then this year we skip a year, right? So we are going to be advocating, if there are some excess revenues, to see some of that moved into the statewide transportation fund that hopefully can help projects such as this. I know it's no surprise to any of you to know that, I remember when we used to say that a 9,000 container ship was a big ship coming into the port. And then we got 14,000, and we're up to 18,000 TEU ships out there now that are going to be calling on our port. We need this project complete, not only for the mobility of our own residents, but really it's so critical to our state and national economy. So for all those reasons, we're really going to be advocating, if there are some excess dollars, to see some of that moved over to the transportation fund.
Well, wonderful. I'm sure we all are very, are united when we say that we're very thankful for your leadership, and also for Mike Kipple's leadership on HR TAC as well. Thank you.
Yes, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say, Mr. Michael Hipple, who leads our HR TAC, and Mr. Thomas Shepard, who's chair of our Transportation Planning Organization, have just been tremendous leaders representing not only this area of the peninsula, but the entire Hampton Roads region. They really have done a fantastic job.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't really have any questions. I just wanted to comment that I appreciate the presentation. It's really quite remarkable what all is going on, and the impact of being able to work regionally to see some of this accomplished. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. And so we're going to be talking about tourism in the next segment here. And looking at that the 64 between Richmond and Williamsburg, what about prioritizing the eastbound lanes so we make it easier for people to come to Williamsburg?
Thank you for that type of comment. I think, we've never, I have to admit, we've never really looked at it in that way. We've always looked, for east and westbound. But that's an interesting thought. And no, that's the type of feedback that's helpful for us. But what we really believe is east and west are both critical, and would like to hang on to the hope that we could get both ways. But thank you, appreciate that.
Mr. Crum, Mr. Kimbrell, thank you very much for being here. Just a couple of questions or comments. I don't think folks can appreciate necessarily all the time the importance of access for the port. I think everybody understands the naval base, and that's why we don't have bridges across the harbor, because you can't afford for anything to compromise that ingress or egress. But from an economic vitality standpoint, the amount of traffic that comes through now and will continue to come through and grow in future years is critically important for the health of the Commonwealth and the whole eastern seaboard. So we appreciate that nod. Can you tell us just a little bit about those 4 lanes in the new board tube? Has it been decided if they're one direction and the other lanes are the other direction, or how's that?
So the 4 lanes in Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel? Yes. So, in fact, we were just at a meeting in Hampton earlier today. So what you can expect to see is that as you're heading east, we will have some what we call managed lanes to be high occupancy toll lanes or hot lanes. What that means is, as I approach them, if it's just me in a car, and I don't mind paying a modest toll, and we really believe we're going to be in that 60 cents to $1, $2 variety, I as one driver alone can jump in that lane and ride it. In addition, if it's Mike and I and there's 2 of us, we can jump over and ride it for free. So what's going to happen is, as you get into the tube, you're going to have 2 general purpose lanes and 2 hot lanes, right? And that will take you through and go the whole way down to 564.
And just for clarification, that works if you have a transponder in your car, an Easy Pass that has the HOV capacity switch on it.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
So it's interesting to me about the 64 between here and Richmond, where there's so little congestion in that 29-mile.
Very congested.
I'm sorry, relatively or comparatively not as congested. That to me suggests there's more local traffic on those other segments of 64 than there is interstate traffic. But it seems that logic would dictate, as you've got 3 lanes on one end that squeezes to 2 lanes and then goes to 3 lanes on the other end, it's inevitable that we're going to create congestion in that segment. Why is there no federal money available for these projects when you've got national security as an issue, you've got health, safety, and welfare of people on the Outer Banks who are trying to evacuate even in our partner jurisdictions and Hampton Roads in the event of a hurricane or a major storm, and all the local money that's going into it with some state support? Is there no federal highway money available?
So very little highway money available at the federal level. We had submitted a modest funding request for the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, but we were competing for $800 million available nationwide.
Wow.
Just to put it in perspective for you. Now, here's what I'm very pleased about. Mike and I have met with Congressman Whitman, who is very, very interested, looking to work on our behalf to stress what we're doing, stress the need for federal assistance. We've met with Senator Kane, Senator Warner, Congressman Luria, Congressman Scott, Congressman McEachin. We're very hopeful that our federal delegation is going to come together for us and go to work and advocate for funding for our area. We believe we are the prime example why we need a federal infrastructure package, that you all and your constituents are paying extra taxes for, let's be honest, projects that are normally funded by the federal government on the interstate highway system. We're very proud of what we're doing as a region, but it's not lost on us that that's really an extra burden for your residents. So we are going to be, and thank you for that question, Mayor, because I think equally important as our advocacy at the state level has got to be our advocacy at the federal level as well. So for all the things we discussed, we really think we need to see some federal participation in these projects.
The one thing I hope people don't underestimate, or I don't think people fully appreciate the amount of regional cooperation necessary from a wide variety of jurisdictions over a broad geographic area, for whom it would be very easy to fall into the parochial, I need to take care of my roads first, in order for everybody to come together and make all these projects possible in a long-range comprehensive plan. And in addition to the other people that you credited, I think Delegate Yancey deserves a lot of credit for pulling everybody together to get us to the point where we are now, to put these projects in an order where it works for the entire region. We have about $750 million in funding, making the current 3 segments of I-64 happen. And it's happening before on a more aggressive timeline than anything on the south side, or even the tunnels, which we've known for decades are a huge problem. So we got to just thank our colleague jurisdictions all over Hampton Roads, and it's going to take probably just as much work to keep everybody together going forward. So you've got 2 years until we run out of time on the current segment 3 of I-64 before that equipment gets shipped off site. So good luck with that.
Well, we're gonna work hard at it, and you're exactly right. We really hold this up as a model of regional cooperation, and you're exactly right. Delegate Yancey, Delegate Jones, Senator Cosgrove, the list goes on and on. All of our local officials, Mayor, your involvement, you mentioned Mr. Shepard, Mr. Hipple. I just can't say enough about our elected officials and how they work collaboratively on this. The other thing that I should say, and I'd like to go back to your previous question when you were asking me about the hot lanes, and I want to stress this. Our region is completely on board not to extend hot lanes up the peninsula, and I want to stress that. Okay, so for now, well, that's the stated position of our region. So as you look at your segment 1, 2, 3, and the whole way to Richmond, those are viewed as free general purpose lanes the whole way.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Kimball.
Thank you.
This takes us to our second background presentation, which is a presentation of the Greater Williamsburg Chamber and Tourism Alliance, a quarterly tourism report. I'm going to ask Mr. Pons, as Council's delegate to the Tourism Council, to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you. It's an honor to introduce Vicki Cimino. Vicki hails from Ohio originally, but off to Boston and New Hampshire, where she recently was the head of the State Tourism Corporation there. And we were fortunate enough to woo her to Williamsburg, and where she's been challenged with creating a DMO that's going to perform and have metrics. And by all accounts, she's hit the ground running, and I'm excited to have her with us. And so.
Great. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks, everybody, for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you a little bit about what I've been up to. I'm rounding out here week 8, so I've been on board for just a couple of months, but I feel like we're making some good strides. As part of that, I thought it would be worthwhile to go through sort of my 30, 60, 90-day approach to building this destination marketing organization. And at the end of the day, our business goal is to increase tax revenue. So we're building this shop so that it's tooled up to do just that. So my first 30 days on the job, we've really been kind of working with the staff internally, auditing who's doing what, really kind of taking a hard look at are folks in the right positions? Are they set up to be successful in those positions? I've been meeting with members of the Tourism Council and stakeholders one-on-one. I've developed an organizational structure that I think will get us closer to being tooled up in a way to meet our business goals. We've drafted job descriptions. I've taken a look at all of our contracts and have begun to draft new scopes of service, which takes me into the next phase here, 60 days in. We're going to, assign our current team into more appropriate roles in some cases. We'll have new leadership roles that will need to be posted. We will issue some requests for proposals for our current contracts. I think, A, it's a healthy exercise to go through, but B, it's been a while. And I would really like to have a stronger grasp on what those deliverables are that we are procuring. We'll also kick off a strategic plan process, and that's going to be really important because I'm very hopeful that you folks will be involved in that process. This will be something that all 3 municipalities, I'm hopeful, will be involved in, because I think that we'll be most successful with that engagement and that cooperation. That will really provide a 3 to 5 year roadmap and hard goals for us to judge how we're doing against. And as part of that, we will have stakeholder one-on-one meetings. And again, I'm hoping that most of the folks in this room will be a part of that process. And then as we move forward to sort of the 3-4 month mark, I'm hoping that we will have gone through our procurement processes, that we can then award contracts. It may be incumbents, it may not. I want to launch a change management plan so that the staff is engaged in sort of the evolution of this organization. I think it's also important for the staff to be engaged in creating vision, mission, and values. I think that this will really help folks who are currently there and folks who will come to the organization to be engaged in building this shop. So team development will be a big part of that. Stakeholder engagement will continue to be a major part of what we do. And I'm hopeful at the end of this 3-4 month period that we have at least a blueprint of what our strategic plan looks like. Strategic planning processes can last a year plus. So this will at least give us some foundation to start with as we kind of then go into a deeper dive. Again, I'm relatively new in this role, but we did have some successes and wins in April and May, and so we've hosted a number of travel writers. The team put together the tourism forum that took place in early May. Certainly Ironman was an event that took place. We've attended multiple trade shows and events, so this is just a real high-level look at what the team's been busy doing while I've been, off in my little space writing job descriptions and contracts and RFPs and all of that good stuff. I do want to connect with you on, again, the strategic plan development. I'm looking at, creating this roadmap. I think that phase 1 will likely take between 45 and 60 days. I want to bring in a third party to help support the development of this plan. I think, that will include an immersion session, again, interviews, surveys, some sort of retreat with the team and the internal staff, and then producing this document that the community can then weigh in on. Right off the bat, and I mentioned that I do want to go out to bid, so we'll be looking to go out to bid for a consultant to help us with our strategic planning. I do want to address the research scope of services. We need, in my mind, 3 or 4 key things. One of those is an ad effectiveness study, so that at the end of the day, hopefully next time I come and present to you all, I can say, this is where we marketed. These are the people who hadn't considered Greater Williamsburg as a place to visit. They saw our ad and they booked travel. And so we will have that incremental travel number, as it is called, to show for every dollar we spent, we drove X dollars in tax revenue back to the municipalities. Again, our agency of record, public relations, and digital work will all go out to bid. Later on, I would really like to look at our guidebook, the development and distribution of that. And if research dictates, I would like to look at hiring a Toronto-based public relations trade representation company. So, but that is sort of pending what the research says. I think that you'll find that my approach is rooted in data and research, and at the end of the day, numbers don't lie. So that will be my focus, is sort of building those metrics and staying true to our business goals. Just quickly, I did want to brief you on the fact that I did attend a conference called Jumpstart in Nashville last week with the Newport News Williamsburg International Airport. For lack of a better word, this is sort of like speed dating with airlines, where you get a 20-minute appointment to have a conversation about route development and really sort of, if it's an airline that is currently flying, like American or Delta, into Newport News, what does their lift factor look like? How many passengers are they at capacity? And so the good news is that the routes that currently exist are doing very well. In fact, Delta just announced late last week that it will be increasing the size of its aircraft into that airport, which will increase capacity by 25 people. And so this was really beneficial to be a part of. We, were there. We had a very strong show. And, I think that the airlines were intrigued by the fact that there is not only a strong business factor within this community to fill the front of the plane, but there is now a strong commitment from the community for the leisure travel factor. And so they were very interested in that, and to know that our sole purpose in life as this new destination marketing organization is to increase visitation and inbound into the area. So I don't want to talk your ear off too much, and I know this will probably be the most fascinating part of your day, hearing me speak, but I'm happy to take any questions, and yeah, let me know.
Well, thank you for being here, and appreciate the information. So 2019's marketing campaign is kind of was set before you got in. I know Tourism Council, we put some extra money into some of the things that we were doing as a result of having additional dollars come in. So now you're going out to bid to find some other, or going out to bid, and we may get the same firms to come back. You see all that falling in place by September, October, so that you can start to develop your 2020 campaign, and so
Yeah.
I think timing's going to work out well.
My hope is to have contracts finalized and begin on September 1. That is my hope. So kind of going into the fall season, that will allow for a couple of things. September is a beautiful month, and it'll be a great opportunity to shoot any new footage or video content that we might need at that point, and to sort of address the overall strategic platform of that campaign. In my head, I have an idea of what that's like, but, we'll make sure we've got the right people at the table to make that happen.
Good. I guess the only other thing I wanted to share with you, at council, when we talked about the maintenance of effort monies that go into the Alliance, and I know at the Tourism Council, and I've shared with the City Council, that we have, as a body agreed to set those funds aside as unallocated funds, just tourism, not for promotion or necessarily for product. But I, for one, and I think some others on council may agree, to have those monies set aside for tourism product would go a long way as well. You know, we developed the Tourism Development Fund here in the city, and the purpose for that was to help create new product to invite people to come to Williamsburg and see it in a way that they aren't familiar with. You know, we're very familiar with history and roller coasters, and we do have a culinary arts scene that's kind of blossoming them up, but they're going to need more tourists to be successful. And so, you know, we think that product is one of those key elements that we need to see. So, keep that in your mind. Is
Noted.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here today.
Thanks.
We are at a unique vantage point given SB 942. We've got a new organization. Every once in a while, if I'm traveling or if I'm watching TV, commercials advertising other cities and localities show up, and now we're in a unique position where we have that much money to be competitive. And you know, I hope to see some more commercials promoting our region, particularly the city, but the region as a whole as well for all that we have. And we're in a unique position to really depart from the status quo, which I'm excited to see where your 5-year roadmap takes you. I'm assuming the previous iteration did not have a strategic plan, so this must be the first for any DMO. Perhaps so. I'm excited.
If one existed, I haven't seen it, but yep.
Right, well,
but I'm very excited to get that plan in place.
Right. So now that we have this influx of marketing dollars, we can finally make a huge difference. I'm excited to see what you propose in terms of metrics and for success. So thank you.
Thanks.
And I would like to thank you for the presentation. It was nice having a very concise statement and plan that you're putting into place and for the future, and particularly your emphasis on data. I think that, you know, big data drives everything these days, and it's very important to have those numbers. And I'm especially pleased that there's some emphasis being put on Patrick Henry, because I've gotten to the point that if I'm flying, I don't even look at Patrick Henry, because even if they have the flights, their fares are typically much higher than Richmond or Norfolk. So in addition to extra flights, we need a very competitive pricing too. And I would like to also ditto what Mr. Pond said about the setting aside funding for product. I think it's very important to expand the brand, and some regional big ticket things could help us in that regard. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks for the presentation, and I was also glad to hear you were partnering with the airport. I was wondering how those conversations went with United.
Well, I actually have some notes here that I can share with you, but I did not meet with the United. I met with Southwest, Moxie, Republic, American, and Delta. And so Delta, you know, later then came out later that week with the announcement of the increased aircraft that they will be flying into Newport News. But both America and Delta said that their profit margin is great. They're really looking at gauge before frequency, but that, you know, they're very pleased with how their current flights are performing. There are a couple of other airlines that are kind of relatively new that are literally waiting to take delivery of aircraft, and so they're shopping around for airports to fly into. So, you know, that there were some good conversations along those lines too. I think at this point it's sort of you know, it's an education process with a number of these airlines. A lot of folks don't realize that there's customs ready to go and right in the basement. So I was shocked by that when I first toured the airport, that, you know, that airport is ready to serve an international flight. So
What do you think about a grassroots campaign where we get the United frequent flyer to sort of bombard United with some communications?
So in the past, I've worked with a couple of different airlines on cooperative marketing programs. JetBlue and Delta is probably the most applicable to this area, where we, meaning the state of New Hampshire, invested $250,000 into a cooperative marketing program with Delta to promote the LaGuardia-Manchester route. And that campaign was a digital campaign. It was not necessarily through the airlines channels. It was through other outlets that you would typically advertise. The campaign did so well that the airline was ready to put another plane into Manchester from LaGuardia, but there was a pilot shortage, and that's a real thing in the airline industry, and it didn't happen. But it did increase the number of passengers into Manchester Airport. And what I like to say is when people fly, they are weatherproof, they stay longer, and they spend more money. And so those are the folks we want to target.
Yeah, and Manchester's a great success story, and people coming from Maine and Vermont to that airport.
Well, and it's funny, the new airport director in Manchester, his name is Ted Kitchens, he had been the airport director in Newport News some years ago. So there was I ran into some people I didn't think I'd see. So kind of neat.
Thank you.
We all recognize you're very new in the position, and you still have a lot to assimilate and pull together. But with that said, do you have any ideas yet what you expect to be the major differences between the 2019 campaign and the 2020 campaign as it relates to either range of advertising, saturation of market, media channels that are chosen, all of the above? Where do you see, because there's a significant amount of additional revenue coming in. From what you've learned so far, how do you see the best ways to apply that?
Intuitively, so the short answer is all of the above. I plan to be incredibly engaged in building the next campaign out. I don't think that the creative should be a potpourri of images checking boxes. I think that the strategic platform should be you can't do it in just one day, because again, we're really trying to drive that overnight visitation and room nights. I think that it needs to expose people to product that they may not know exists here in this area. And so, will it be a dramatic change? I can tell you, I don't think Fun Expected has a long shelf life, but I am looking forward to sort of modernizing our approach and, again, exposing and educating people to the things that they may not know exist in this area. I will be primarily focused on broadcast, digital display advertising, working with travel partners like Adara so that you can really literally you can tell if somebody clicked on your ad and then went on to book lodging or a flight. I mean, it's kind of Big Brother, but it's as a marketer, I love it. So it's but I'd like to stick to tactics that allow us to very clearly show our success rates, and that will be my focus.
And you mentioned earlier that the numbers don't lie, and I think we'd all agree with that. But it's really sometimes the interpretation of the numbers that makes a difference, going back to Mark Twain's comment about the 3 types of lies. Lies, paraphrase, darn lies, and statistics being the last one. We have found some data to be particularly elusive to obtain in this community that we can have good faith in. And Mr. Pons and I have had this conversation multiple times. One that came up over and over and over again was length of stay. And we all know if you can increase length of stay by 0.4 days, or it can make an enormous impact. That's average length of stay on the entire tourism picture. Have you had the chance yet to identify any gaps in data that seem to exist and how you would go about filling those? So I'd like to, again, I think that we need really 4 key pieces of data right out of the gates. It's that ad effectiveness study. In the past, I've worked with companies that handle destinations like Oregon, California, Texas, Florida, Illinois, major municipalities. I think that it's important to select a vendor that is specific to tourism marketing organizations, whether it be state offices or DMOs like we're building here, so that the methodology is shared across 30 different states and 60 different cities. And so there is some consistency in what we're reporting and how we're reporting it. And again, that would be intended to measure that incremental travel that if
the Williamsburg Tourism Council didn't exist, people, it wouldn't take credit for the people who would come anyway. It would only take credit for the people who saw our work and chose this as a destination. But I also would like to create an online kind of something that the community can go in and pull down things like visitation, employment, direct spend, tax revenue. There are a number of metrics that, again, in my past life up in New Hampshire, that we were able to make public through this online dashboard that anybody could access. Ideally, we could do it as a region, but then break it down by the 3 municipalities. So I also would like to do some focus groups. I want to look at domestic long-haul markets. I want to know what the propensity to travel to this area is. So I think that right out of the gates, these are pieces of data that need to happen. But again, at the end of the day, we're going to be judged by, are we driving and increasing tax revenue? And that's the big one.
And lastly, on the question about maintenance of effort, clearly the city is committed to additional tourism product through the Tourism Development Fund and our desire to have the balance of that maintenance of effort money that is no longer needed by the chamber because they're smaller profile in the business council. So taking that difference in amount and putting it into a regional pot, certainly sense some level of agreement in our two partners in York County and James City County. But I think real value there, not only in growing the tourism product and doing regional projects that we might not be able to do on our own, and the counties certainly wouldn't be able to do because their money's going to, their half of the money from the sales tax is going to a different purpose. But I really think it helps build a partnership and buy-in on all 3 jurisdictions, which is going to be something we have to continue to work to maintain. And just one last comment. As much as we may have agreed on maintenance of effort, we don't really have a choice because it's in the legislation. But I think we're all in concurrence that the product, additional tourism product, is an important way to go. So unless there are other questions, thank you, Ms. Cimino.
Okay, thank you. Nice to be here.
This takes us to our 3rd presentation today, and I see the city attorney already moving to the podium. This is a presentation of the 2019 General Assembly Legislative Update, or highlights from Richmond. Ms. Shelton. She's done, okay.
Shortest presentation ever. So I'm going to give council my usual preamble to this. This is not intended to be a comprehensive overview of everything that happened in Richmond. It's highlights and things that you're either going to see again because we're going to bring ordinances to you, or they're things for council to consider, or they're issues that touch upon the city. And hopefully this will be a little shorter than in past years. To start with taxation, it seems like every year we bring back an amendment regarding exemptions on real property taxation, and this year is no different. So Senate Bill 1270 provides an exemption on real property for the surviving spouse of a service member with a 100% disability rating. So when that spouse with a 100% disability rating passes away, the spouse who remains continues to enjoy that exemption and can continue to enjoy that exemption on subsequently owned real property until the spouse remarries. Once the spouse remarries, the exemption is lost.
Can we ask questions as you go along?
Yes. The exemption applies only to the principal place of residence of the spouse, which is consistent with what the city code currently provides and the state code currently provides. This is not optional, this is mandatory, and so you will see this ordinance in July.
Does it transfer from residence to residence?
Yes.
Does it apply to somebody who moves into the state long after the death of their spouse?
Yes.
And so it's retroactive for anybody who's,
Yes.
okay, thank you.
House Bill 1937 amends Section 58.1, 3212 of the Code of Virginia. So this exemption involves persons who have a disability, not only individuals who have a disability associated with their service in the military. Currently, the income calculation includes disability income. This change in the state code allows the locality to exclude disability income when they're calculating their income for purposes of qualifying them for the exemption. So there's a ceiling on how much someone can make when they qualify for the exemption. The city does not have an exemption. The city has a deferral program, but this would also qualify to the deferral program. This is not mandatory. This is optional. So if City Council would like us to do this, we will need to amend the code. Senate Bill 1425 adds Section 58.1, 3715.1 to the Code of Virginia regarding the taxation of food trucks. So when we talked about food trucks, this was one of the questions, where do you pay B-Poll? And we have been having food trucks pay B-Poll in the city when they register to participate as a food truck in the city. One of the things that they have to do as part of the zoning application is go downstairs and talk to the Commissioner of the Revenue. So for new businesses that are mobile food units, so food trucks, they are required to pay business license tax in the jurisdiction in which their vehicle is registered. So if you live in James City County and you buy a food truck and you operate that food truck out of James City County, you pay B-Poll in James City County. The exemption applies for 2 years after you start your business, and after that 2 years, you pay B-Poll everywhere you operate your business. You still have to register in the locality that you are operating in. So if a food truck in James City County were going to operate in the city of Williamsburg, they would still have to come to the Commissioner of Revenue and register with the Commissioner of Revenue. And they can exempt up to 3 mobile vehicles. So if I have 3 food trucks, I can apply the same exemption to all 3 food trucks. After that 2 years, this exemption goes away, and so you would continue to pay B-Poll just as people are paying B-Poll now. We will need to amend the zoning ordinance, but it will be a very simple amendment, because right now one of the requirements in the zoning ordinance is that they pay B-Poll to the Commissioner of Revenue, and we will need to add some language along the lines of if necessary. So you will be seeing that. There were a couple of economic development bills. I just want to talk about one of them. House Bill 2182 amends various sections of the state code. So when there is surplus property owned by the state that the state is no longer interested in holding and they have decided to divest themselves of that, they are now required to notify the chief administrative officer in the locality where the property is located of their plan to dispose of the surplus property. After that notice, the locality has 180 days to submit a proposal to the Department of General Services for a use of that surplus property. So if you had a piece of surplus land in an economic development project, you would submit a proposal to the Department of General Services proposing that economic development project. It can either be the locality or it can be an economic development entity, so our EDA or our regional economic development group. And it has to be a bona fide economic development activity. So that's submitted, the department reviews it. If it meets their criteria, then the department and the locality or the economic development entity negotiate to see if they can come to the conclusion of this deal, and if they can, then they sell the property to the locality or the EDE, or if they can't, then they're allowed to sell the property on the open market. So it basically gives localities and economic development entities the first bite at the apple at the surplus property. Senate Bill 1171 amends various provisions of Title 4.1. So the last 2 months we have talked about updating, and City Council has updated our ABC licensing provisions to match the state. And both of the times that I've brought those to Council, I've mentioned to you that there is more coming from the state. So this is the more that's coming from the state. There is now a local special event ABC license, which permits consumption of alcohol within the boundaries of a special event. So occasion for the arts, art on the square, something that occurs across public property. That allows beverage retail sales within the event, and the alcohol has to stay within the boundaries of the event. There is a local piece of this, so there's a state ABC license and a local ABC license piece. And only local government, business improvement districts, or nonprofit organizations are allowed to apply for this special event license from the ABC board. So there will be one more change coming to you for that ordinance to add this provision.
real quickly, business improvement district is different from like a downtown designated district, right?
It's an association that's formed for that purpose.
Understood.
On to zoning. One of the more complicated issues, and there have been stories about it in the local paper, is regarding proffers. Remember that several years ago, we talked about 15.2-2303.4, which was passed, that require proffers to be reasonable. And there are reasonable proffers for impacts on-site and reasonable proffers for impacts that occur off-site. And it allowed developers to challenge local governments when they reject a project because of an unreasonable proffer. It creates an action in circuit court for a challenge to a decision of the city council regarding rezonings. So other than advising our planning staff on taking great caution and what that means with respect to proffers, we did not stop taking proffers as a result of this. We don't have large-scale residential development projects in the city simply because we don't have that much land left in the city. So we have taken proffers over the course of the last 3 years. None of those proffers have been challenged. However, a lot of the bigger jurisdictions in the state, including one of our neighbors, decided that there was too much risk associated with taking proffers, and so they simply stopped taking proffers. And that caused a lot of consternation in the development communities because proffers are a useful tool to allow impacts to be addressed in a way that makes sense for that project. But because of the uncertainty associated with the previous legislation, proffers were not being taken any longer. And so those jurisdictions have been working for several years to try to come up with some language to mitigate those problems. So the bill that was passed this year is an attempt to do that, and it adds language that, I'm going to read some of this, that clarifies that an applicant may submit written proffers. And when they do that, their signature on those proffers is considered evidence that they find that the proffers are reasonable. So when they are submitting proffers and they sign off on those proffers, they're effectively saying these proffers are reasonable. But it isn't necessarily the case that those original proffers are the ones that council eventually ends up seeing. It adds language that the failure to submit written proffers shall not be the basis for the denial of any rezoning or amendment to proffers that are submitted. So there's got to be a legitimate land use issue that the rezoning denial is based on, besides the fact that the developer has not submitted proffers. This is, I think, is the biggest section for us. It adds language that provides that the discussion that occurs between a developer applicant and the locality is not the basis for a claim that an unreasonable proffer or amendment to a proffer was required by the locality. So it's when a developer comes in and submits a plan, they don't necessarily know what the impacts of that plan are going to be. And one of the problems with the previous legislation is that you can't really sit down and have that conversation with the developer because anything that you say to the developer is going to be a request for an unreasonable proffer. So this removes those oral discussions as evidence that the proffer request was unreasonable.
But some localities did have proffers that they published that said, in order to do this, you must do that, you must offer it willingly as part of your application or we won't consider it. So that's where the real problem was?
And we're going to see what changes, what this does to that policy. It adds language that provides that actions to challenge local government action pertaining to the proffer, so a rezoning or a denial of a rezoning. They can bring those challenges, but they have to object in writing to the governmental body regarding the proposed proffer condition before the governing body's grant or denial of the rezoning. So that basically puts you on written notice that some proffer that they have deemed us to have asked for and they included in their proffers is not reasonable, and they are putting you on notice that they find that to be an unreasonable proffer.
So it can't just be, we didn't like the outcome, so
Right.
we're going to challenge you.
Okay. So those are the highlights. That's not an in-depth dive on proffers. Again, we have proffers, but the types of proffers that we have are pretty minimal in comparison with some of the other jurisdictions. They're dealing with hundreds of homes And we simply just don't deal with that. And that's the reason why we didn't stop accepting proffers. We still have to take great care in dealing with proffers. So we will continue to do that, and we will work with the planning staff to make sure that the process for that is in accordance with the code. Moving on through zoning. House Bill 2375. So Section 15.2, 2285 allows the local governing bodies to shorten the 100-day review period that the Planning Commission has to review an amendment to the zoning ordinance. So we have in the city code, the Planning Commission has to take up something that's before them within 100 days. If they don't take that up within 100 days, then it's deemed to be recommended for approval and it moves on to City Council. 15.2, 2285 allows City Council to shorten that period of time. What this bill does is require the local governing body to hold at least one public hearing prior to shortening that review period. I've been with the city now for a long time and we've never shortened that review period, but if we did that through the city code, we would have to have a public hearing anyway because it would require an amendment to the zoning ordinance. House Bill 2569 allows the locality to authorize the zoning administrator to issue an administrative permit for daycare centers inside a home serving between 15 and 12 children. So now it's permitted with an SUP in certain zoning districts. If council would like that to be, I can't think of the last time we had one of these, but if council would like that to be an administrative process, we will need to put that into the zoning ordinance. House Bill 1913 amends 15.2, 2242 to allow localities to include in the comprehensive plan that all subdivisions, lots being subdivided or developed, must provide for sidewalk if the zoning administrator determines that a sidewalk is required for the proposed development. So the Planning Commission will need to determine if they want to put that into the draft of the comprehensive plan. There was a provision, a code change regarding building permits and codes. Section 36105 of the state code allows local governing bodies to impose fees for new construction permits to defray the cost of building enforcement and appeals. House Bill 1966 amends that provision to require that any fees that are imposed by the locality on building permits have to be used to support the functions of the local building department. And the exception to that are the fees that are imposed by the state for training programs of the Department of Housing and Community Development. So really that's an accounting change. House Bill 1874 changes cruelty to animals to a Class 6 felony. And Senate Bill 1367, which comes out of our neighboring jurisdiction, provides that a locality may adopt an ordinance prohibiting dogs from running in packs, excluding hunting dogs, and provides for a civil penalty of not more than $100 for a violation, but that penalty has to be used to support animal control.
How do we stop the dogs from doing this?
You impose the penalty, and presumably the owners keep track of their dogs.
Is this inspired in part from what happened in our neighboring jurisdiction?
Yes. Okay, streets and sidewalks. Title 46.2 is the provision of the state code that pertains to motor vehicles and roads. So as of January 1st of 2020, motorized skateboards and scooters, which is defined as a scooter or a skateboard with an electric motor with a maximum speed of 20 miles per hour or less and weighing less than 100 pounds are not going to be considered motorized vehicles and may be operated on sidewalks unless the City Council adopts an ordinance prohibiting the operation of those on city sidewalks. It goes on to provide operational requirements for those that are very similar to bicycles and prohibits the devices on the interstate highway system. It also provides for a pilot program that also needs to be implemented by January 1st of 2020 for shared use of scooters and motorized skateboards, and so staff is working on that and we'll have something for council in the next several months.
So this strikes me as something that could have a pretty significant impact.
Right now we allow bicycles on city sidewalks, but these are different.
And when we talk about scooters, we're talking about the two-wheeled vehicles with a handle and not like an electric wheelchair type.
That's right. These are not personal assistive devices. These are scooters with handles and helmets and recreational devices.
Is there already an allowance for the assistance
Yes.
devices?
Yes.
So in terms of, we have talked about this ad nauseum at the Virginia Municipal League. Mr. City Manager, when are we expected to have a separate line item, agenda item to discuss this more fully at a future date?
Yes, it's our intent to bring back to you a suggested ordinance that would accomplish the goal of talking about what we want to do.
And by then, from what I've heard in my meeting at Virginia Municipal League, some localities have taken the action to find numerous ways to, enact these regulations. So perhaps by the time that we deliberate our own ordinance, we can look to some of the best practices from other.
Absolutely. We've got a distinct advantage in that there are localities already in the Commonwealth that have adopted regulation and are implementing these programs, but there's a wealth of communities all over the country that have done this on a much larger scale, and we will have the opportunity to sort of pick the best pieces of all of them to try and make an ordinance work.
Thank you.
There were two bills addressing stormwater. House Bill 1614 authorizes localities to create a local stormwater management fund for the purpose of granting funds for stormwater management and erosion on previously developed land. So there's a program, an ability to create a fund to help offset the cost of stormwater management on previously developed lands. Senate Bill 1400 authorizes localities to make loans for the initial acquisition and installation of stormwater management improvements on new development projects, so long as you have willing property owners, the property served and the adjacent properties that are affected by the stormwater management.
So it's up to the locality how they fund
Yes.
this local stormwater management fund?
Yes. Another big change in the code that really doesn't impact council, but I wanted to make you aware of it, is House Bill 2758, Senate Bill 1339. Extensive changes have been made to the foster care program in the state. It's an extremely long, very detailed provision of the state code. Senator Mason was the sponsor of it. I'm going to give you highlights. The Commissioner of Social Services is permitted to address problems within local departments, and that can be anything from directing corrective actions to be taken by the departments up to taking temporary control over the foster care services of a local social services board. If that board is failing to provide foster care services in accordance with applicable law and regulation, or if any action has been taken creating a substantial risk of harm to any child under its supervision in the foster care program. It requires the state to establish a hotline to receive complaints regarding foster care services. It establishes a framework for the use of federal 4E money. So that is federal money that we use to support our local foster care programs. And some of that money now is to be routed to prevention services. In other words, services to try to keep children out of foster care in the first place, which we have not been able to fund through 4E money before. And so we can pay for things like mental health treatment, substance abuse prevention and treatment for children and parents, in-home parent skilled-based supports. The state is, over the course of the next year or 18 months, working on how all of this is actually going to be implemented, which services we're allowed to use federal 4E money for, qualifying service providers for that. This is all in compliance with the 2018 law, which is the Federal Family First Prevention Services Act. One of the focuses of that is to require a really close examination of whether there are kinship placements or relative placements for children to try to prevent them from going into foster care in the first place. And so there will be requirements for extensive examination of that before taking a child into foster care or in an emergency immediately after taking a child into foster care, and annual reexamination of those potential placements when there is a child in foster care. So it is a reworking of how localities deal with foster care services in their jurisdictions and how the state manages that. It also creates a statewide registry of foster parents because, as you probably know from the media coverage of this, there are just not enough foster parents for the need.
So the foster care situation, it can be obviously very tough on the children. And all the oversight that can be provided, and I mean, just the difficulty in finding the foster parents is one thing, but then ensuring their care. But it seems like this step for the Commissioner of Social Services to take control over foster care services of a local board is a pretty drastic step. Are there guidelines within this that describe what sorts of things need to happen? Because a substantial risk of harm to any child under its supervision could be very broadly interpreted.
So over the course of the next 12 to 18 months, the Department of Social Services will be doing any number of trainings with us. This is new law, so the regs are not fully established yet. It is an ongoing process on the part of the state. I don't know if you want to throw in anything, Wendy, or it's going to be a challenge implementing this, and it's going to be a challenge on the local level and on the state level.
Yeah, and I was in a meeting this morning. They're still trying to figure out the details of all of this. So they're anticipating a lot of the, October of, that they're supposed to switch over, but I think it's going to be next July when this all goes in place.
So
And the details are not figured out yet.
yeah, ongoing process right from how do they do what you've asked to qualifying service providers. And we use masses of service providers for children in foster care, children to whom we already offer prevention services. We have a lot of contracts with a lot of different service providers depending on the needs of the child. And so to use this federal 4E money, they're going to have to meet specific qualifications. And so right now, one of the things that they're trying to figure out is who do they have in the state who actually meets those qualifications. So there's a lot of work. This is the first shot across the bow so that the state code complies with the requirements of federal law, and then it's moving the pieces to make sure that that is a functional system. Okay, so I've got Conflict of Interest Act and Freedom of Information Act, and one more slide, and then we'll be done. Senate Bill 1430 requires that local elected officials complete training on the Conflict of Interest Acts provided by the Virginia Conflict of Interest Act Advisory Council, sorry, it should say council, once every 2 years. So the first of those trainings has to be completed within 2 months after assuming office for officials already in office as of July 1st of 2019. The first training has to be completed by December 31st of 2019. I understand this is supposed to be online training. We are monitoring when that is going to be available for you, and we'll figure out how to get that to you, if it's in a conference room altogether or if it's in individual computers going through the training. I don't know what that's going to look like yet, but that training obviously has to be available from the body that is required to provide you with that training, and so when that becomes available, we will let you know.
So we don't have credit for your training?
You do not get credit for the training that I have given you, no, unfortunately. But similar bill for the Freedom of Information Act, Senate Bill 1431, mandates that local elected officials complete FOIA training at least once every 2 years. Now, this one may either be online training provided by the FOIA Council or training provided by the local government attorney. There is, however, a delayed effective date for this, so it doesn't actually go into effect until July 1st of next year. And that is, I suspect, to enable the FOIA Council to get some training together and online.
But it's interesting, though, that the conflict of interest training, which must come from the Virginia Conflict of Interest Act Advisory Council, that's mandatory, but that has a closer deadline.
Right, well, so several years ago, the city was required to name FOIA officers. And if you are a FOIA officer for the city, you have to go through the online, you have to go through training every year. And for a period of time, there was some training that was available online, and for reasons that I don't understand, they took it offline, and it's not available now. And so I have been doing those trainings for our FOIA officers every year, and my expectation is that I will probably continue to do those trainings, but I will include counsel in those trainings every year, or every 2 years. There were some additional changes to FOIA. Senate Bill 1554 provides that in addition to any penalties imposed under FOIA, if a court finds that any officer, employee, or member of the public body fails to provide a record because the individual altered or destroyed the record with the intent to avoid the provisions of FOIA prior to the expiration of the record's retention period set by the Library of Virginia, then the court may impose a civil penalty of $100 per record altered or destroyed. And the only council document that's really going to apply to are emails. And by and large, your emails are on the city's email system, and those are archived. So, but you need to be aware that it is already a penalty to willfully destroy records under FOIA, and this just sets a penalty. And it's a fairly extensive penalty if you're talking about $100 per email and someone asks for an extensive number of emails.
What does it mean to destroy? That's something beyond delete.
Yes.
Server and trying to
Right.
hide it and destroy it there.
It's no longer available prior to the retention period set by the Library of Virginia, which for emails is incredibly short.
Guess I don't have to worry about that.
So that would prove willful and knowledge.
Yes. In addition, if the court finds that a member of a public body votes to certify a closed session, and that certification was not in accordance with Section 2.23712 of the Code of Virginia, the court may impose a civil penalty on the public body of up to $1,000. The court is allowed to look at mitigating factors such as reliance on court opinions, attorney general opinions, or FOIA counsel opinions. This bill started with some language that was a little bit different than this. So it provided that the individual member of the public body could be charged with a fine of up to $1,000 if the local government attorney was in the room when the certification occurred. And my colleagues and I did not think that was a particularly good provision because that disincentivizes city council from taking advantage of their attorney who is there to provide them with legal advice. And fortunately, there was a reconsideration of that original language, and so the language now doesn't matter where I am when city council certifies the closed session.
So my only question is, this imposes, it's a civil penalty on the public body, so therefore immunity doesn't apply to the body, because that will have to be criminal.
No, it's civil, but there are, if there's a code provision, if there's a court opinion, if there's an attorney general opinion or a FOIA counsel opinion that says the certification was correct, and those are really going to only apply when there's an argument about how you categorize what you're talking about, under what closed session exception. If you're just going into closed session and you start talking about something that you haven't moved to go into closed session to talk about, those are not really going to help you. It's really just when there's an issue about whether the thing you're talking about qualifies for closed session under the one exception that apply.
I'm sorry, can I just ask questions about a couple of prior slides? The FOIA one, it's page 22 of 25. If a court finds that any officer, employee, or member of the public.
Public body.
Oh, okay, thank you. The other one is, the slide before that, 21 of 25, mandates that local elected officials complete FOIA training at least once every 2 years. Local elected officials. What about state elected officials?
That's a good question. I didn't carefully look to see if state officials are obligated to do this or not. My suspicion is no. It definitely applies to local elected officials, but I will get back to you on the state officials.
Okay, and the COIA requires that local elected officials complete training on the Conflict of Interest Act.
Again, I was looking for you, not for the state, but I will get back to you.
Probably in this different part of the code, that's why.
Okay. There is a saving grace opinion, or provision. So House Bill 1772 provides that any officer or employee or member of a public body alleged to have willfully violated FOIA who acted in good faith in reliance on an opinion of the FOIA counsel may introduce such advisory opinion as evidence that the violation was not willful. Okay, so that's the last of the things that passed. But As you know, we've talked a lot about short-term rentals. We've been monitoring short-term rentals. City Council adopted the short-term rental ordinance in February, and so I did want to let you know that in this session, there was one bill that was introduced, but it did not get out of committee, which applied to counties using the urban executive form of government, which is effectively Fairfax. Limiting certain zoning provisions pertaining to the number of nights of rentals, so they had to allow it for more than 180 nights, and the number of units rented, so there was some language that said something to the effect of, if someone has an Airbnb, that can't be the basis of denying them the right to do another Airbnb. That didn't get out of committee, but again, it's along the lines, same trend, that localities are adopting short-term rental ordinances and somebody's ox gets gored and we get a bill. So we are monitoring, obviously, because now we fall into the category of jurisdictions that have adopted a bill, so we're keeping a really close eye on this. But I did want to let you know there was at least one bill that was introduced this session. And if you have any other questions, I will be happy to answer them or try to answer them.
I have one other question, and you may not be able to answer it now, and it goes back to the very first one. You don't have to go back to the slide, which amends the exemption on real property taxation for the surviving spouse of a service member with 100% disability rating. There have been a number of these types of bills that have passed related to surviving spouse of a service member who was killed in action, or relating to a service member with a disability, 100% disability, or now the spouse of a service member with 100% disability. And I cannot imagine everything that these folks have been through in their lives trying to protect the rest of us and the liberties that we enjoy living in this country. So I don't have any problem with any of these. What do you know what we're doing at the state level on income tax or any state taxes that are placed upon these folks to give them some reduction of burden at that level?
Nothing that I'm aware of.
Chris, in terms of the first slide as well, 100% disability rating, does that also include service members with TDIU, total unemployed employment compensation? You have to get 100% disability rating, but
so the reality is that
inclusive.
in order to meet the requirements, there are various things that have to be on that letter. And there are different combinations of that qualify according to the guidance that we have from the state.
Yeah.
So the assessor has to look at each and every one of these letters and make sure that they apply based on their total disability or their service rating. And we've had that issue come up over the course of last year. Right. It's very specific, though, so we will continue to do that, but
it might seem like an administrative problem, but there is a huge difference between attaining that 100% disability rating and then also attaining that TDIU, which is a lot more difficult.
Yeah, we're going to use exactly the language out of the state code in the amendment to the city code.
And there are not many. It's extremely hard to get a TDIU claim.
Yes.
So.
Other questions?
One question. One of the proposals that we all supported was delaying the elections in June by a week to not conflict with the schools. Any update on that?
Or the primaries?
Yeah.
I need to go back and check. I will let you know on Thursday.
I don't know either.
Okay. Moving on, we have city council communications. Does anybody have anything to report from any of their liaison assignments?
Sir?
Yes, sir.
Schedule of meetings, Mr. Trivette, anything you'd like to highlight for us?
Just a couple of things. The Red Cross Mayor's Blood Drive will be on June 13th at the Community Building from 10 to 3.
Thursday?
Yes. Hopefully we get a lot of people to come out because my understanding, Dan's not here, but it's my understanding we are the defending champions in this regional competition for quantity.
And that aside, it's just a good thing to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. City council meeting on the same day, followed by a called meeting of the Williamsburg Redevelopment and Housing Authority. And then on June the 28th, we have the Tourism Development Grant Review Committee. We'll be reviewing the Phase 2 applicants' presentations on that day. And then on July the 4th, the city will be closed in observance of Independence Day.
Questions? No? This takes us to the open forum section of our meeting. If anybody would like to address council, please come forward. Seeing no one, close the open forum, and I believe we had an item, at least one, if not more, for closed session.
We do. Mr. Mayor, I move to go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2, 3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing two personnel matters per subparagraph 1 concerning appointments to boards and commissions and the city attorney's annual review.
Second.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin,
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey,
Aye.
Mayor Freiling,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons.
Aye.
Mr. Zhang.
Aye.
Council will take a brief recess and reconvene in closed session.